playing XOut left me feeling surprised in all sorts of ways. I'm not as familiar with the shmup subgenre as some are. Having played a decent number of them over the years, I'm familiar with some of their features that are a mainstay of the subgenre. I briefly took a glance at XOut and assumed that it'd be just another shmup for me to play, but I was quickly proven wrong. What immediately stood out to me was how cool it was being able to customize the sub I chose to use. That was surprising because most of the shmups I've played force me to choose pre-made options. If it's not that, it's a single ship / whatever, and being able to change things up thanks to pickups or unlockable upgrades. There were limitations to how much I was able to customize in the beginning, but overall, it was easy to understand. For the most part, abilities were clearly labeled and arranged from low to high damage output. Unsurprisingly, I chose to go with the strongest options. What was disappointing to see was how quickly endgame equipment was unlocked. I played and beat XOut in around 2 hours. About 10 or 15 minutes into it, I started to see how much was unlocked early on. Some of the options were behind an in-game credit paywall, but since it's possible to accumulate a decent amount without too much difficulty, it's not that big of a deal. My issue is that being able to unlock and use powerful upgrades made the game easier much sooner than I thought. The game quickly felt imbalanced, and even if it was still challenging, this wasn't handled as well as it could have been. Moving on to the combat, some enemies were too bullet spongy while others could be taken out in one hit. I get that the idea is to make it so that there's a range of enemies to go from easy to hard. The problem is the large difference between the difficulty of them. Some might as well have not been a challenge at all, whereas others came off more like steel walls moving towards you. This is something that I'll bring up in a bit. Initially, I thought that there weren't any continues. Being that XOut was originally released on the Amiga, I wasn't surprised to assume that the game needed to be beaten in one sitting. I eventually realized that it wasn't like that. Before I found that out, I wasn't too bothered by the lack of conventional continues because the levels really weren't too long. Some of them were harder than others, and that's understandable. What's worth noting was how easy it was to keep playing. Even if I initially thought it was hard, it's fair. I'd be on the second or third stage and it was easy to start over. That's something that I've brought up in previous reviews. Super Meat Boy is one example I've brought up more than once because even if it can sometimes be punishingly difficult, there aren't too many obstacles between dying and starting over. It's almost instantaneous, so even if you've died more times than you can recall, you have no problem trying over and over again. While that was largely true, what bothered me was feeling that the levels and their obstacles were harder to deal with than the enemies. At one point I started to think that it was kinda like platforming, but for a shmup. Despite being initially annoyed, I was drawn to that because I'm pretty sure I've never encountered something like that before. In other shmups I've played, the backgrounds are really just there as eye candy. In XOut, it was clear that if something was on screen, it was meant to be avoided, whether through taking it out with your firepower or maneuvering around it. Speaking of that, it was nice being able to change the rate at which I could control the sub. That led to more maneuverability or even slower / cautious movement. Besides using this to my advantage when facing off against enemies, it helped when I needed to move through tight or awkward passages. The problem is that insta-death happened when I hit an obstacle, and it happened too easily. I'm sure some might think, well, you should have been more attentive, but seeing as how this is a shmup game and this subgenre of games sometimes leaves me feeling like I'm trying to make myself cross-eyed. It's because of trying to keep an eye on way too many things at once. If I was dodging multiple projectiles, I could easily end up running into an obstacle and take myself out. This is debatable, but what's great is that as a result of this happening more times than I can recall, XOut let me know that it was possible to prevent this from happening. A cheat menu appeared and it let me know that I could use a protective hull to prevent myself from crashing into obstacles. I like playing through games without having to make things easier, but sometimes I'm willing to do so if I feel it's not to the point of exaggeration. Having had the initial assumptions that I had of XOut, I eventually thought that I'd have to use a lot of cheats to make it through the game. I ended up using the one I mentioned because I didn't even unlock the other ones. It's clear that there were a few more to unlock, but chances are that I'd have to accomplish something specific or stumble into them as I did when I kept crashing my sub over and over again. What's cool about XOut is that even if I do have some complaints about it, it's possible to fix some of them yourself. It's mainly as a result of what you choose to do or not do. I could have made it harder than it needed to be had I not used the protective hull cheat, but I didn't want to risk getting to rage quit levels of frustration. I previously mentioned thinking less of XOut because of how quickly the abilities and different subs are made available. What I eventually realized is that I wasn't forced to use them. I came to that decision on my own because I saw what the base difficulty level was like. Had I decided to put in the extra time and effort towards overcoming that, I could have just stuck to a bare bones build, but I didn't. It also helps that each ship has a number of combinations to work with. Some have less than others, mainly because they're inexpensive and offer fewer weapons/ability slots. What's cool is that as a result of all the weapons/abilities that are available, mixing that up with the 4 available subs makes it so that there's a lot of replay value to be had. One of the reasons why I felt that XOut was harder than it really happened to be was due to thinking I only had 1 life to work with. It was towards the end of my time with it that I realized that buying additional subs counted as having more lives. Once I found that out, I bought more as a way of having more lives to work with. That also offered the opportunity to choose different build options instead of copying the same one multiple times. I really didn't do that though because I went with what I grew accustomed to playing with. If I had to sum up XOut in a few words, I'd say not what I expected. Take that as both good and bad. I don't think it's bad that a game happens to be more forgiving than I anticipated. I do, however, think it offers a lesser experience when endgame content is available too soon. I'm sure that I sometimes don't come off this way, but I enjoy when a game offers a fair challenge. If it's too hard to the point where I'm getting close to rage quitting, I doubt I'll keep that up by continuing to play. Surprisingly, I liked XOut. I didn't think I'd see the credits roll after 2 hours of playtime, but I'm sure that has to do with the era of gaming XOut is from. I know that era of gaming has tough games that come off as damn near impossible to beat, and that adds to its playtime. At the same time, in the hands of a skilled player, those games can be beaten in 1 to 2 hours. Chances are there's someone out there that could speedrun through XOut and make it seem like it doesn't offer much. I like knowing that it's possible to add to XOut's replay value, but at the same time, part of me feels like that's a bit of a cop-out. XOut is a pretty niche game, but seeing as how modern retro indie games can sometimes be critically acclaimed and sell millions of copies, it's not as if it's too out of place in modern day gaming. At the same time, I don't see it being played by a general mainstream audience because you would have to go out of your way to find it. I'm a Shmup fan, but had I not received an email informing me of XOut, chances are that it would have gone unnoticed by me. Either way, this game is meant to be played by Shmup fans. If you've never given that subgenre of games a try, XOut would be a decent entry point. It could have done a better job at making some things clearer than it did, but the entry barrier isn't high at all. How do you feel about having to customize a game to fit your playstyle? Are you willing to use cheats if they help a game become more accessible for you? What are your thoughts in regards to difficulty padding a game's runtime? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.